Hello adventurers! My name is Chance, welcome to my spellbook, and thank you so much for tuning in to the 9th episode of our background series. There's only about 50-ish in all, so we're kind of nearing that 20% mark, which is pretty impressive for such a short span of time, if I do say so myself. In any case, today's video is going to be all about the City Watch, also known as the Investigator, depending on what variant you go with. We haven't really covered variants too much, and they're not super relevant. They usually just offer a slightly different mechanics here and there, but for the most part they're fairly identical, so it's not really worth doing a whole separate video on them. In any case, this City Watch, or the Investigator, is found in the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. As with quite a few of the backgrounds, I find the Sword Coast Adventures Guide is relatively underrated for what it provides, but it does certainly offer a diverse amount of backgrounds to choose from. In any case, let's quickly move on to its description. You have served the community where you grew up, standing as its first line of defense against crime. You aren't a soldier directing your gaze outward at possible enemies. Instead, your service to your hometown was to help police its populace, protecting the citizenry from lawbreakers and malefactors of every stripe. Very cool stuff, kind of like Batman-esque as well in a weird way. I don't know, it's kind of cool. Let's take a quick look at its mechanics here. Initially, your skill proficiencies are athletics and insight. In languages, you gain access to 2 of your choice, and the equipment is a uniform in the style of your unit and rank. A horn, which you can use to summon help, is really just a loud horn. There's no magical benefits to it. A set of manticles, which are really just handcuffs, and a pouch containing 10 gold piece, which falls in line with the average. In terms of the Investigator variant, it's essentially identical mechanically, with the exception is you gain investigation rather than acrobatics. So if you decide to go with the Investigator variant, you have skill proficiencies in investigation and insight. Everything else is identical. So once again, it's not really worth doing a separate video on that entirely. It is kind of cool. In terms of which one's better or worse, just depends on their play style. If you're a more martial character, then I can almost all but guarantee athletics will serve you better. And if you're more of a sideline fighter or a utility-based player, then investigation will likely be the optimal choice for you. Now let's move on to its feature, the Watcher's Eye. Your experience in enforcing the law and dealing with lawbreakers gives you a feeling for local laws and criminals. You can easily find the local outpost of the Watch or similar organization, and you just as easily pick out the dens of criminal activity in a community, although you're more likely to be welcome in the former locations rather than the latter. It's overall an incredibly strong ability. It kind of removes a decent chunk of the exploration pillar, if you will, by just kind of giving you the locations, which is rather nice. However, the obvious drawback here is as it can be inferred that you carry yourself in a manner that will likely tip a lot of criminals off to your general outlook on the law, which is interesting. But not necessarily always going to be the case. Worth discussing with your DM for sure. Now let's move on to its suggested characteristics. Under the personality trait, I put, I am haunted by memories of war. I can't get the images of violence out of my mind. Under ideal, might. In life as in war, the stronger force wins, and this will tick you towards the evil direction. Under bond, I'll never forget the crushing defeat my company suffered or the enemies who dealt it. And under flaw, my hatred of my enemy is blind and unreasoning. Very interesting stuff. However you want to roleplay this is of course up to you, but it does portray a character that will be relatively stoic and calm unless one of those aforementioned enemies is nearby or is identified, after which they will become emblazoned with rage and vengeance. Very cool stuff. However you'd like to roleplay is surely up to you, but this is one of those characteristic sets that will likely lead to some interesting and rather rapid confrontations. Whether or not the party is in charge of that, or even likes it, or they're just along for the ride, is kind of up to how quickly they can react to your response. Very cool stuff, does lend itself to a whole character arc in of its own, of you seeking out vengeance for the company you belong to, and dealing the final blow to the mercenary organization that went against you, or perhaps you unveil a greater plot that you were unknown to before, and kind of changes your perspective. Very good stuff overall. Now let's take a look at my personal thoughts on the City Watch or the Investigator. I really do like this set of, I do like this set of balance between the mechanic, the feature, and the characteristics. I think it works really well, and it's likely to provide you with some pretty great utility at almost every level of play. The Watcher's Eye feature in particular is certainly good. A lot of the features we've covered until this point have been either active or have been to directly benefit the party by either giving them shelter or equipment or providing them with a reasonable way to gather information. This is by far more of a passive ability. It's based on your intuition, and there's a strong argument to be made for the higher your insight or your investigation or even passive perception, the more likely you are to take advantage of this. A quick note about the Watcher's Eye, however, is it is quite vague on purpose. You can pick out the dens of the areas that might be involved in some more nefarious activities, or the areas that appear to be involved in more righteous paths. However, there's no guarantee that that's actually the case. It might just appear that way, or there might be a more complicated plot lurking just beneath the surface that calls everything into question. It's up to the DM whether or not they want to take advantage of such narratives, but it certainly is something that would play in. It might also lull the party into a false sense of security, or potentially cause them to get into altercations that might otherwise not be necessary, or even be at the party's detriment, depending on the actual circumstances at play. Regardless of how you decide to go about it, it is still a strong ability, and the mechanics offered are pretty great as well. The only real drawback is the lacking of a tool proficiency, however that is not always necessary. I do like the inclusion of the horn and the manticles in the equipment, as those are active items that would surely benefit the party in a variety of circumstances, serving as a distraction or an appropriate way to bind an enemy that is by far more secure than just typical rope would be. That being said, let me know what you think of this City Watch and its Investigator variant down beneath in the comments section. Be sure to mention any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, ideas, pulp culture references, or even stories of your own. And if you'd like to be able to test out the City Watch in a quick one-shot adventure, feel free to get a free one over at the Guildhall using code WELCOME, links down beneath in the description. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, and as always, happy adventuring.